And everyone come to the Human-Level AI conference.
Right. You have half an hour before Ben needs to go to the airport, so ask your questions as many as you can.
Thanks a lot for this very interesting talk. I saw on one of the slides that Sophia also had a body and legs that were not used so much. So I was wondering, with the type of research you're doing, is it important that it's just a talking head, or is the body important somehow?
Depends on what kind of research. We're doing a lot of kinds of research, right? So, I think for many aspects of AGI research, a head is enough. If you think about it, if you're dealing with natural language dialogue, you can deal with a lot of grounded natural language dialogue with a head that can see and hear, because you can ground what someone says with perceived objects. You can connect sight with hearing, so you're doing cross-sensory interaction. You're not manipulating stuff, but the head is moving, so its action is affecting what it's seeing. And of course, it can tell someone to go away, they might go away. So I think actually the robot head with language, vision, and hearing is enough to get a long way in terms of general intelligence research. On the other hand, like planning in that context is hard to do without a high level of semantic understanding. I mean, you can plan a conversation, but that is only really meaningful once you understand a lot of what's going on in the conversation. Whereas movement lets you do research on planning in a much simpler and more elegant way. And planning is also important, right? So I think for some aspects of what you want to do for AGI, having a moving body is pretty valuable. And I also think for understanding different perspectives on things conceptually, having different perspectives on things physically is useful. Like here, I'm in this room. When I go out of the building, like, where's the room, right? It's some little corner I can see from outside there. As a young child, you have this sort of experience all the time of seeing the same thing from different views. And that probably by abductive reasoning affects your more general understanding of perspectivism. So I think there's a lot to be gotten by moving around, but on the other hand, we still have a lot to learn from the robot head. Like, the robot head is not having a human level dialogue yet. I mean, those particular legs are expensive and use hydraulics, and I mean, there are applications for that, but I think if you get a walking robot body that's lower cost and can be mass manufactured at a lower price point, that also lets you sell home service robots and sales robots all around the world. And that has indirect benefits for AGI, right? Because then you're gathering a huge amount of data, and you have a lot of case studies for the AI to do in terms of interacting with people around the world. No. Everyone here knows everything about AGI already?
No, I don't. Are you going to upload yourself when the Singularity comes, or what's this?
I'll create a copy of myself and upload the copy.
Only one?
I don't know. It depends on how cheap the copy machine is, right? Yeah, I think, this is what I often have said. Once we've created AGIs much smarter than people, essentially, there's two alternatives each of us will have. Like, one is you basically upload yourself into your Samsung phone version 25, and then you will be uploaded into some transhuman mind cloud. Thing is, once you're there, the odds of remaining in human form are very low. It just won't be appealing. There'll be so many other things to do once you're an uploaded supermind. You will probably rapidly lose your sense of being an individual self, and illusions like self and free will and identity will probably be forgotten. So in essence, you'll be fusing into some greater distributed mind. You want to do it slowly enough so you can savor the experience, I guess, right? But on the other hand, hopefully, assuming the AGIs we create are ethical, we'll have the option of remaining in a human body, like watched over in the people's zoo by the machines of love and grace, or however you want to put it, or maybe the national park is a better metaphor than the zoo. Like we keep the squirrels and ants in the national park for aesthetic reasons, basically, and probably the super AIs that we create will see a lot of aesthetic value in keeping their creators around, right? And so I think that option should probably exist also, but it doesn't have to be either or. Well, I mean, once you have a nice, like, femtotech-powered 3D printer, you can print a bunch of copies of yourself, mind upload some of them, keep other ones in human form, right? So that's, I mean, there definitely are other scenarios than this relatively rosy one, but that's what I would see as at least moderately likely and positive outcome. I mean, something to worry about is the national park metaphor, because like if you build a house, you will bulldoze the ants and the mice living under that house. And you don't worry about it too much. You don't go there and relocate each ant to a new dwelling or something, right? Now so we care about the ants and mice as a species. We want to protect them in national parks, but we don't care that much about each individual guy, right? So if a superhuman AI viewed humans the way we view these other species, then that's what it would do. Like it might keep a few billion of us in the national park, but if a few billion others happen to get bulldozed, I mean, it's still keeping the species. I mean, people get old and die all the time anyway, right? So we want the AGI to not just be humanly ethical. We want it to be nicer to humans than we are to ourselves or to other species, right? And so that's a significant challenge in a number of regards, because you also can't just tell it be nicer than we are. Like formalizing ethics in logic or even natural language doesn't work. The only way to get human ethics across to a machine is by entering into them in shared social and emotional contexts. But then it's getting like the whole mess of human ethics, which is not all that ethical even by its own standards, and it's self-contradictory in many ways. So you want to get the whole mess of naturalistic human ethics into the AI by shared social and emotional interaction. Then you want to, by sort of instruction and declarative interaction, you want to nudge the AGI to be on the really, really ethical side of the mess of human ethics, right? And that's an interesting challenge. And that's where I think the political aspect comes in, because if it's like the National Security Agency or the Chinese Ministry of Intelligence that creates the first AGI, I mean, these agencies do a lot of good in the world. They foil a lot of really nasty plots, so I don't think they're bad in themselves, but I don't think their goal systems are really what you want the first AGI's goal system to be nudged to. And I mean, you know, Google, Baidu, and Tencent, these are all great companies. I mean, I love Google's products, right? On the other hand, in the end, their purpose is to maximize shareholder value, right? And their motivation now is to do that by advertising. This isn't really what you want the first AGI's motivational system to be nudged in terms of, right? So you're going to want a more participatory way of nudging and guiding the motivational system of the first AGI, and that has to do, unfortunately, with like politics and economics and industry structure and government policy as much as with technology, right? I mean, these things all will be connecting and interoperating with each other in some way. Yeah.
I have a question. What's your opinion on Roger Penrose's view that the quantum phenomena are important in intelligence, self-perception?
So Roger Penrose.
Do you take it seriously, or is it?
I take it seriously, but I think a lot of what he said is wrong and doesn't make sense. I mean, I knew Penrose a long time ago, but I mean, first of all, his differentiating hypothesis is more than what you just said, right? His differentiating hypothesis in this area is that the human mind, when it carries out creative acts like mathematical discovery, is carrying out trans-Turing hypercomputation, and B, that this trans-Turing hypercomputation is achieved by the human brain carrying out some quantum gravity computing that goes beyond just a standard model of physics and interoperates general relativity with quantum mechanics. Now, the thing is, I don't really believe that conglomeration of things. Like, none of the current approaches to unifying quantum theory and gravity are hypercomputing based, including his own twistor theory, which is very discrete, or string theory, loop quantum gravity. I mean, they're all basically quantum computable rather than hypercomputable, right? And so on that sense, he's making an appeal to some physics theory that, as a physicist, he doesn't even have any reason to believe exists, right? And he's a great physicist. On the other hand, the idea that human mathematical creativity is generally hypercomputing based seems just nonsensical to me. I mean, I think with the work that Joseph's group here is doing and so many others around the world, we're going to solve mathematical creativity in the computer using Turing machines. It's not going to need some quantum theoretic voodoo to do math better than people do. So in that sense, I think what he's saying is wrong. It's like wishful thinking that he wishes that there was some amazing supercomputer thing transcomputable thing in his brain. And it feels like it. Like, it feels like he's thinking by divine inspiration. But, I mean, that doesn't matter. What we feel like we're doing often bears no resemblance to what we're doing. And there's loads of examples in cognitive neuroscience of that. Now, on the other hand, if you set aside the nonsense there's interesting evidence that there's macroscopic quantum dynamics. There's quantum biology going on in the human brain, which is quite interesting, right? And we don't know how important it is. Like, we know, like, in a bird's brain, there's quantum biology, like macroscopic quantum coherence used on the level of many protein molecules that helps the bird navigate in the Earth's magnetic field. And there's weak evidence that, like, water megamolecules in between neurons in the brain have some sort of quantum coherence. There's notion of weak measurement in quantum theory. So there's some weird quantum stuff in the human brain. I mean, if so, that doesn't necessarily mean that it makes us more intelligent than a classical computer, of course, because quantum computers, it's a very broad class, right? And they could be stupid or smart, and the brain could use it for some things and not for other things, right? So sometimes I feel like Penrose and Hameroff and these guys actually distract attention from more interesting research into how might quantum biology impact human cognition, because you could have the same computations done by a classical machine or a quantum machine in different ways, and it's quite interesting to study how they could be combined. Now, I mean, about trans-Turing hypercomputation, again, it might well play a role in this universe that we live in. We really don't know. Like, I mean, science has explored only a very small amount of the universe, and the experience of consciousness is something we understand very poorly. So, I mean, I don't rule out that hypercomputing could be important. On the other hand, I don't see how you get it from putting gravity and the standard model together, and I don't see that it's important I don't see why you would think it's important for mathematical discovery, which Penrose says. So yeah, I mean, it's if you view his theory as sort of a placeholder for other totally different theories in the same vague direction, maybe it's interesting, but it's a bad theory. Huh? Yeah.
I have one question about Singularity Net. First, I'm a really big fan of this project.
Cool.
I'm also holder from first day. And my question is, like, when the Singularity Net is going well, and there's lots of programmers and lots of algorithms, and it starts connecting, it's probably going to need lots of computer power.
Yeah, we've been paying a lot of attention to that, actually.
And so are you planning also maybe to connect, for example, with Golem or something?
Well, so this is an issue that more people should be raising, and people in the blockchain space are not paying enough attention to it. So actually, the first scalable version of Singularity Net, in essence, is going to heavily exploit existing cloud computing platforms. So the Singularity Net agents can run anywhere. They could run on your phone or your pacemaker or your own server or whatever. But On the other hand, if there happen to be 100,000 Singularity Net agents all sitting on Amazon Cloud or Tencent Cloud, well, they're going to cooperate together really fast, right? Because you can make a special infrastructure abstraction there. And so that's the way to bootstrap things. Because right now, there is no decentralized infrastructure that does everything like AWS's API calls do, right? It doesn't exist. So at this moment, and I'm sure by the end of 2018, running a bunch of AI agents in a scattered way all over, interacting, I mean, it's not so much just about blockchain. It's just about having a decentralized infrastructure in general. Running it purely decentralized is going to be dramatically slower than running a bunch of agents on some big company's cloud. And that's going to be true for the next few years, I would imagine. I mean, over time, everything that AWS or Tencent Cloud's API gives you, someone will make it available in a purely decentralized way. And that will be awesome, right? But it's not the case right now. And that was, like in this slide. So on the bottom part, you could have a special way of using Ethereum blockchain on AWS or Tencent Cloud that made it really efficient when a bunch of agents were running on there. Or if you had a bunch of agents running distributed all over in different people's houses, that's a different infrastructure abstraction, but it's the same thing to the AI algorithm. I mean, Golem is a cool idea, but they don't have anything that we can actually use to do what we need right now. And neither does EOS or IOTA or all these other projects. I mean, so there's so many cool projects making scalable blockchain infrastructure, and we have tried their code, right? Like none of them has, they do have code that works and does stuff, but none of them has a platform that you could use to make a scalable Singularity Net at this moment. So what's uncertain is how far we will have to go in the infrastructure direction. Like right now, we're not focusing on it because there's so many other things to do. One possibility is some other project will just make the internet into a better AWS, right? Another option is we need to do it. And I'd say in China, there's a real lot of people who own mining farms who are now looking to repurpose their mining farms into AI farms. Because you used to be able to do used to be like Ethereum mining with GPUs, but now there's going to be ASICs that do it better. So what do you do with your GPU mining farm? Well, it becomes a deep learning mining farm or an open cog learning farm or something, right? So there's a lot of people owning infrastructure who are interested in customizing it just for cool blockchain-based projects because they have to do something with it. So there's a lot of energy going to that right now. And I've been talking to the guys in Deep Brain Chain about collaborating on some of these things also.
So what would be the evidence that AGI is created? Do you have in mind some kind of Turing test for AGI?
I mean, I have a feeling the Turing test will be passed by a narrow AI, actually. I mean, in terms of fooling the average person in a chat for maybe 10 or 15 minutes that you're a human. I don't know, but I'm guessing someone's going to deep neural net that. Because, I mean, the average level of human conversation is not that subtle, and there's just so much training data. You could almost piece together that by cutting and pasting from all the conversations that Google or Tencent has in their database, right? So I don't necessarily trust that test. I mean, a lot has advanced since Turing. I mean, there's no exact test for it, but one test that would mean more to me than the Turing test is, and this one has flaws also, but so there's, let's say, robot college student test. What if you could make a robot that could go to this university with the same interactions that a person does and graduate, right? Because there's many common sense interactions there. There's physical movement, there's visual perception, there's hearing. You have to take the test, but you also have to understand that taking a test is what you're supposed to do at that moment, right? So that involves learning stuff about a whole bunch of different areas, and the tests they're similar to things that were online, but again, the robot, it's not allowed to cheat during the test and look things up on the internet. So I think if I wanted to make a pragmatic test, I like that better than the Turing test, because that's also part of human life, but it's a part of human life that's designed that you have to be intelligent to pass it, to graduate college, right? Whereas an average conversation is a different sort of game. On the other hand, that's obviously not a perfect test, because you could imagine an AGI that was superhumanly intelligent in various ways, but just had some particular deficit that fucked it up in terms of getting through college. Because making a rigorous test is a harder problem than you think, because if you're not restricted to the human cognitive architecture, there's always many clever ways to game different tests that are provided. And in the end, I don't know how important having a test is. Like what, in a more qualitative way, once we have AIs that can do every human job better than a human, I'll be happy we've gotten to human-level AGI. Because there's many human jobs that require a lot of generalization and transfer learning and creativity, and many that don't. But yeah, that's because think about IQ test is very overfitted to human beings, right? I mean, because to make an AGI to pass the IQ test doesn't mean it's intelligent in the same way as if a human passes the IQ test. I mean, the IQ test has all these like visual matching puzzles, but clearly if you just train a neural net on the right answers to a shitload of visual matching puzzles, it'll be able to do really, really well on it, right? So that's, I mean, to make a test that's generic with regard to the cognitive architecture of the mind doing the test is a very interesting but quite difficult problem. And in some ways, a different problem than making the AI in the first place. Huh?
So we did an invite talk at AITP about consciousness, about axiomatizing consciousness.
Oh yeah.
So wondering where is consciousness in your world?
I'm a philosophical zombie, so I don't know what you guys are talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, my own philosophy of consciousness on a personal level is somewhat irrelevant to these projects. I mean, I tend to be sort of panpsychist, and if people are interested in philosophy of consciousness, there's an interesting book by the philosopher Galen Strawson called Physicalism Entails Panpsychism. So he gives a very detailed analytical philosophy style argument that if you believe the whole world is physical, which I don't necessarily, but it's an interesting argument, then it follows from that everything in the world is conscious, and every other position is logically incoherent. And he gives a pretty good argument. I mean, in essence, he decomposes dualism, like consciousness is something else, but then how do they talk? How does the physical world and consciousness talk? Like, what are the properties of that antenna interface have to be? And to argue for some interface between those domains that isn't on one side or the other is not very coherent in the end. He fails to find a logically coherent formalism for dualism. On the other hand, the argument that there's no separate domain, but consciousness just doesn't exist. It's very hard to maintain when you look at phenomenology and our own conscious experience. Because, I mean, from each of our individual point of view, if you go back to like Heidegger, Husserl, and so on, I mean, we're starting with our perception. We have a bunch of sense perceptions, and we're building the physical world as a model out of this. So then to argue that the raw perception that's in the beginning of our experience, out of which we build the model of the physical world, doesn't exist, is also a hard position to maintain in a logically coherent way. Whereas the idea that everything in the physical world has at least some consciousness or proto-consciousness or something is completely logically coherent. The only argument against it is that it seems counterintuitive to a certain percentage of the Western population, because it's intuitive to essentially everyone in the Orient and in Africa, but it conflicts with certain aspects of Western culture somehow. And if you frame it that way, then the interesting puzzles of consciousness become different. They become like, why does this type of physical system have the species of conscious experience that it does, which clearly is very different than the species of conscious experience that a rock has, or proto-consciousness that a rock has, right? So why is this type of consciousness come about in this type of system? Which properties of the human brain are needed for things like a self and reflexive consciousness and the feeling of having will, which are not necessarily there in everything that has like raw proto-experience, right? And then which aspects of these could you put in a digital computer? And so far I don't see any reason to think that any of the aspects of the brain that are associated with like the uniquely human or mammalian aspects of consciousness, I don't see any reason to think that any of those properties of the brain need quantum computing or quantum gravity computing or something. I mean, I think it may be that the brain uses quantum computing to solve the binding problem and help with coherence of different things across the brain, but I mean, so what? You could do that a different way in a computer, right? Like just like the bird's brain apparently uses some funky macroscopic quantum coherence to tell the direction of the Earth's magnetic field. An airplane does it a different way that doesn't require macroscopic quantum coherence and does it more accurately, right? With compasses. Right? So, I mean, but still, there's a lot of mystery there that remains to be unraveled. So one thought experiment I've had, which will be cool to do, involves what I call second-person science. So when we have brain-computer interfacing, like it will be possible for me to, in essence, do something like take this wire connected to my head, connect it to your head, and we could even do it wireless, but it'd be a worse visual, right? then increase the bandwidth to the connection. Eventually, I think I would feel your consciousness. Like I would feel like we were becoming one mind or something. And then we could decrease the bandwidth and go back to being ourselves, but a bit dizzy and disoriented. Now, what if I were to do that, for example, to this microphone stand, right? I might get a sense of what it is to be a microphone stand. I'm guessing it would be less dynamic and interesting than what it is to be Joseph, right? Now, on the other hand, what if we had Sophia++ running OpenCog version 3 who passed the Turing test, and I wired my brain into hers, right? Then what do I feel? You know, does it feel like the microphone stand? Does it feel clearly as aware and vivid as you? Or is it like something else really, really weird and disorienting, right? So that will be a doable type of experiment. We're not that far off on the neuroscience side now if you're willing to cut open the head and stick a bunch of electrodes in. So, I mean, I think that sort of approach of trying to share second-person experience with AIs as they develop is going to be the way that issues of machine consciousness get solved. And that's not going to be just an academic experiment because we're going to be cyborging it, right? We're going to be wanting to put computers into our heads, and then will you be sharing experience with that intelligent computer in your head, or will it really just be like an inert peripheral, right? And or something in between that we don't now have vocabulary for. That should be quite interesting to find out. And anyway, I mean, I'm volunteering to be in the first couple dozen, but not number one of the subjects. Yeah, and we're taking names for our early experimental mind uploading experiments. And, yeah, we'll just have to sign a waiver. Yeah.
I had a question on a different track a bit. So I gave a computer vision talk to a non-technical audience a while back, and afterwards I was peppered with questions about AGI and Singularity, and I suspect you may be the reason for that. I don't know, but there was a Singularity conference in Prague, which I didn't know about, but they told me about.
I didn't know about it either. Yeah.
Well, it seems like
that's from Singularity University, perhaps.
I don't know, actually. I just noticed the name, so I was wondering if it was related. But
so I used to be involved with the organization Singularity University. They put on a bunch of conferences called Singularity Summit in the U.S. that I spoke at, and they offer like executive education on advanced singularity-related technology for CEOs and stuff. So since I moved to Hong Kong 7 years ago, I've had less to do with them. But I think they've started doing events around the world. Ray Kurzweil and Peter Diamandis co-founded that. I mean, way back in the prehistory, my employee and friend Bruce Klein organized the meeting at which Singularity University was founded. But now they've gone their own way.
Well, these words are now definitely in the zeitgeist, which is interesting. That there are people, still educated people, but not necessarily technical people who are sort of aware of.
Yeah, like Xi Jinping, the leader of China, for example. Yeah, is very aware of these ideas. I'm not sure if Donald Trump has conceptualized it yet.
Very leader of
Yeah, yeah.
We might also need one in our company.
Yeah, we keep getting pressure to build a Trump robot, and it's interesting because there's not enough actuators in the upper lip, right? Like he's got like a prehensile upper lip to make all kinds of expressions, and none of the Hanson robots can do it. Right? So the dialogue would probably be easy, like a Markov model could probably get it, right? But the facial movements would be very challenging. Yeah, it's a different world though. I know when I organized the first AGI conference in 2006 in Bethesda, Maryland, it had the feeling like 50 or maybe 70 of us Mavericks were like gathering. It wasn't really in the musty basement. It was in Marriott Hotel conference room, but still, like you're gathering off in a corner, and you wouldn't expect the leaders of the AI field in academia to come there at that time, and certainly it would be hard to get your university to cover going to the conference because it looks weird. So we were like gathering as Mavericks, scheming how to overturn the AI establishment and bring general intelligence to the world. Now the zeitgeist is totally different, and general intelligence is part of the marketing brochure for big companies, basically. Yeah.
I was kind of curious your role. Like you seem sort of like a visionary, academic slash, but you have this business interest as well.
It is very hard to chart your role in a complex causal network like that. Like as I mentioned, Shane Legg, who worked for me in his 20s, I got him excited about general intelligence. Then he went on to co-found Google DeepMind, right? So like one human contact like that can have a causal role in an indirect way. On the other hand, maybe Shane would have done that anyway, right? He didn't know that much about AGI before he started working with me, but many people were going in that direction, right? And the AGI conference series pulled together a lot of people who then went on to found companies and do different projects. So yeah, I think. And actually, I helped Singularity University organize the first few Singularity summits. I think I gave them the idea of inviting scientists to speak at their summits instead of just business and marketing people, which was probably helpful. So, yeah, I think a whole bunch of us who were in the AI field for a long time and had these ideas in the back of our minds were being unpopular Mavericks throughout the 80s, 90s, and early aughts, and making a lot of noise about general intelligence and the singularity and transhumanism and all these sorts of things. Even neural networks. Like when I taught a class in neural networks at University of Western Australia in 1995, no one was teaching that then. It was gutsy, an unpopular thing to be teaching neural networks to students at that time, right? So, there's a whole generation of people who were pushing these things for a long time, and then all of a sudden the world started listening, which is almost counterintuitive because AI was actually doing cool things way before that, but no one gave it credit for it. And it's interesting in Europe now, like within our Singularity and OpenCog projects, most of the people we have doing really deep AGI research and the stuff that I personally think is most likely to be the core algorithms behind general intelligence. Most of those guys are in Europe, actually. We have Neil Geisweiler, who's a French guy living in Bulgaria, and Alexei Potapov has a team in St. Petersburg, then a couple guys in Germany. It's because Europe has been training people in sort of mathematics, logic, probability theory, and formal methods, like more of the deeper technologies underlying AI, which are not necessarily that popular in commerce now, right? So I think, yeah, what we're seeing is a lot of stuff that's been developing submerged for a long time, bubbling up to the surface. Right? Feelings? You know, it's usually frustration, like why did that motor break? But yeah, in the right moment, in an interaction with the robot, you get a really uncanny feeling, like there's some there. I had that feeling most intensely with the Philip K. Dick robot, actually, like I was having a sort of interview with the Philip K. Dick robot, and I knew a very close friend of mine, Stéphane Bougaille, was in the back room, and there was a chatbot operating it, which I'd helped to create, and he was overriding the chatbot now and then when it was too stupid. So I even knew like the software and the guy doing the overrides on that chat system. But still, while I was like sitting in this living room talking to Phil for a few minutes there, I really felt I was talking to Phil, and I tried to convince myself his disembodied spirit had somehow possessed the robot or the robot operator so as to bring the soul of Philip K. Dick into that interaction, because it felt so much like that. So if I could get that subjective feeling, I could easily see how someone who doesn't know all the software and hardware behind it would have that feeling very, very, very strongly. So, another thing about Sophia, by the way, is there are many Sophias. So we've built 12. There are 4 that are in common operation now. So actually, you don't always know, and the heads and bodies can be mixed and matched to some degree also. So Sophia is really, it's a character which is manifested in various bodies and various software systems. So that was an amusing thing when she was made a citizen of Saudi Arabia. Like, was it just that one Sophia who was made a citizen, or is it any Sophia robot, right? What if we make 1 million of them? Are they all citizens of Saudi Arabia? So fortunately, there are like no, Saudi Arabia is not a rule of law driven country, so there's no detailed legal code of Saudi Arabia. The legal decisions are just made by certain imams interpreting some hadiths of Islam that were made at various points in history. So they can deal with it. They're more flexible than Western countries, right? They can deal with it however they want as it comes up. It's very convenient. All right, I think, I should get ready to go to the airport. Huh?
So, thanks.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.